Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. It is review time once again, and today's review comes in the shape of the film Captain America: The First Avenger. Now, Captain America happens to be the last film by Marvel Studios before the massive assembling of the Avengers film in May 2012. So after seeing the film today, I just had to review it and let you know my thoughts about it. Now, I have to go about and say this. The story of Captain America is a very interesting one. Here you have a man who is physically unable to go about and join the army, though he happens to have a good heart and noble intentions, which are qualities that the average soldier does not have. And that is the thing that makes him special enough to go about and join the super soldier program to become Captain America. And after he becomes Captain America, he fights in wars and is used as a propaganda symbol, and then eventually breaks away from that life to go about and take on the Red Skull and fight the world of World War II. And while fighting in the war, Captain America and Bucky happen to be caught in an explosion where Bucky is believed to be dead and Captain America is hurled into freezing waters in the North Atlantic and then left there in suspended animation until he is thawed out by the Avengers several years later. And then you have the story of Captain America being a man out of time who's had his whole life erased. Everyone that he's ever known, loved or cared about has all been left behind in his previous time period. And in theory, it happens to be a very interesting story because there are so many levels of drama and emotion that one can get out of that, and it should make for an interesting live action adaptation. Now, the problem with Captain America: The First Avenger is that it takes all of the great source material and streamlines it. And while most of the elements of the original story is kept in the film, the problem is that a lot of it streamlined to the point where there are a good number of things changed, or a lot of dramatic elements that were in the comics that don't quite make the right sort of transition into live action. And let me go about and say this just before I continue. Captain America: The First Avenger is not necessarily a bad film. It's just a film that misses the mark on a good number of occasions where it could have been something amazing. It could have been something that we could remember as a good comic book film for many years. Except it just happens to miss a certain je ne sais quoi that is required in this day and age of comic book adapted movies. Now, I bet you're wondering exactly what in the Captain America film actually worked. Well, technically speaking, the characters were pretty darn good. Let's start with Chris Evans as Captain America. Now, as many other people, I still don't believe that Chris Evans should have been cast as Captain America because, as we all know, Mr. Evans happens to still have that face of Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four films. And in my opinion, he was the only thing that held those films together, and he was the only character out of all four of the people involved in those two movies that actually embodied his comic book counterpart. However, I still have to say that he did a bloody good job in going about and giving us a completely different character from what we know in the Fantastic Four films. As Steve Rogers, he happens to be a very serious, patriotic man who wants to go about and do good, but doesn't have the ability to do so. However, through a series of events, he happens to gain the power to become more than what he was before, but not lose his genuine heart and soul. And I found that to be fairly cool. Several points in the film, I was continuously watching him to see if there was any signs of the Human Torch within his character. And I found next to nothing about that in him in the film at all. He seemed like a completely different person. While I still feel that there could have been more drama squeezed out of him, overall it was still a pretty good performance. And now we're going to move on to Hayley Atwell as Peggy Carter. Overall, she happened to be fairly cool in her role. She happened to be a fairly interesting female character and a good love interest for Steve Rogers. She not only looks good, but she also knows how to use a gun and also knows how to throw a good punch as well. I felt like the relationship between Steve and Peggy could have been worked on a little bit more, but overall Hayley Atwell gave it her best and it was still pretty cool. Now, I also wanted to go about and talk about Hugo Weaving as Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull. Straight from the time that he was cast as the Red Skull, I thought, you know what, this is perfect casting. Hugo Weaving is just one of the most awesome guys in existence in the world of film, especially when he's portraying villains, especially after seeing him in the Matrix trilogy and the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well. There was no doubt in my mind that he would go about and give us a good performance. And just like any other sort of comic book villain, he wants to go about and take over the world, and he does a fantastic job in being a menacing, evil man, taking out his enemies. And while he was good in the movie, I just wish that there was a lot more time for us to learn more about his character and see more of his planning. And I also want to go about and give a mention to Sebastian Stan as James Bucky Barnes. To be honest, he was fairly decent in the movie, but overall, I felt that there was not nearly enough screen time of him for me to go about and necessarily care about his character. I know in the comics that he happened to be a much more pivotal character than the way in which he was treated in the film, in my opinion. And obviously, there was a good number of things changed about Bucky, from his age to his physical appearance and this, that, and the other. But overall, for what it was worth, Sebastian Stan happened to do a fairly good job as Bucky. I just wish that there had been much more time devoted to the relationship between him and Steve as non-biological brothers after Steve's transformation into Captain America. Oh yes, and I also wanted to go back and give a mention to Dominic Cooper as Howard Stark. In Captain America, his version of Howard Stark is a lot more reminiscent of Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Tony Stark in the first two Iron Man films. And it was fantastic to see Dominic Cooper's interpretation of Tony Stark's dad, and it was performed wonderfully. And I also wanted to go back and give a mention to Stanley Tucci as Dr. Abraham Erskine, who happens to be the German scientist who crafted the super soldier serum that gave Steve his chance to go about and become the man that he was. He was a fairly interesting character in the film, and a very funny man as well. I didn't expect Stanley Tucci to be as funny as he was in the film, but I was very glad that they gave him as much dialogue as they did. And I also wanted to go back and give a mention to Tommy Lee Jones as Colonel Chester Phillips. He was just amazingly funny in this film. I didn't expect him to get as much screen time as he did, because literally thinking about it, he's more or less a secondary character more so than the main cast, but he was just fantastic. Every scene he was in was just wonderful. Now, as an overall film, Captain America the First Avenger happens to do a lot of things well. There are some well choreographed action scenes with Steve using his shield to the best of his abilities, and he dishes out the pain in a good number of ways. And when we have the scene with the Howling Commandos and the fights between the Hydra agents and the use of the fancy futuristic technology, it's all fantastic to go about and stare at. However, I'm glad to know that my predictions before this summer was right, that Thor was going to be the better film of the two. And think about it, Thor was going to be the harder film of the two to adapt, but Thor happened to thrive a little better than Captain America has. And while I don't want to go about and put too much blame on Joe Johnston, the director of the film, I just feel that, he was possibly the wrong choice to go about and direct this film, and I felt that someone with a little bit more artistic vision should have been picked for the role. But I still would say, go watch Captain America. I will not deter you from watching the film because it's actually a good watch. Just don't expect to be completely blown away. However, I do want to go about and mention that the Avengers teaser at the end was bloody wonderful. It's bloody well short, but bloody wonderful. I am going to go about and say that right now. And I probably will be seeing Captain America again just for that last bit as well. So, overall, I'll give Captain America the First Avenger about a 7.5 out of 10. It's a fairly decent movie, but I wouldn't say that it is the best in the Avengers films. It seems to have that second Marvel Studios film effect, like when Iron Man first came out in the year 2008, and that was a great film for 2008. Then we had The Incredible Hulk, which wasn't really incredible, but more so adequate. So it was good. And while I would say that this film is better than The Incredible Hulk, there are comparisons to The Incredible Hulk in the sense that it's good, but not nearly as good as it should have been. Anyway, that's been my review of Captain America. Hopefully you found it informative, and look forward to my next review when it comes. So until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is me signing out.